The conference room felt frozen in time. I stood at the front, laptop open, hands steady even though my heart hammered against my ribs. Javier sat 3 chairs down, that smug smile plastered across his face like he'd already won. The straight and tech executives waited, pens ready, watching me with curious eyes. I clicked to my first slide, not the one Javier expected, but the one I'd built in secret for the past 3 months. The deck glowed on the screen like a quiet rebellion. Javier's smile flickered for just a second. I caught it and felt something shift inside me. This was it. Everything I'd worked for, every late night, every planted breadcrumb, every careful step, it all came down to this moment. The air conditioning hummed softly above us. Someone coughed. The CEO adjusted his glasses. I looked at the CEO of Straighten Tech and said, "Good morning. Thank you for being here. I know you've seen proposals before, but today I want to show you something different. Something that actually solves your real problem." The room leaned forward slightly. Javier's pen stopped moving. I took a breath and kept going, knowing he had no idea what was coming. 3 months earlier, my email pinged with the kind of message that changes everything. Subject line, Stratton Tech Lead Assignment. I opened it and felt my stomach flip with excitement. I'd been chosen as project lead for Straighton Tech, one of the biggest accounts our firm had ever landed. The bonus alone was $75,000. Enough to change my life. Enough to prove I belonged here. Enough to finally pay off my student loans and help my parents with their mortgage. Javier called me into his office that same afternoon, hand extended, smile warm and genuine. "Congratulations," he said, gripping my shoulder like a proud mentor. "This is your moment to shine." He walked me through the project folder he'd prepared. Streamlined, he called it. Clean client brief, curated contact list, trimmed market research, everything organized in neat folders with color-coded labels. "I've simplified things so you can focus on execution," he explained. When I asked about accessing the full client files, he waved it off. "Don't overthink it. Everything you need is right here." Something felt off, like a door closing softly behind me, but I ignored it. This was my big break. I wasn't going to mess it up by being paranoid. The problem started small. Tiny things I almost convinced myself didn't matter. Calendar invites for client check-ins would disappear from my schedule. I'd show up to meetings only to find they'd been rescheduled without anyone telling me. The market research Javier gave me looked polished, but when I checked the date, it was from 2 quarters ago. I flagged it in our next meeting. "This data's a bit old," I said carefully, trying not to sound accusatory. Javier laughed it off. "You're being too academic. Clients don't care about perfect data. They care about confidence." I nodded and made a note. Then there were the customer personas. Beautiful documents, detailed profiles, names and pain points all laid out. Except when I searched for them in our CRM system, they didn't exist. Not a single one matched any real client record. Every time I brought up a discrepancy, Javier had an answer, a chuckle, a wave of the hand. "You're overthinking this." His responses came so quickly, so smoothly, like he'd practiced them. I started keeping notes. Not because I suspected anything yet, just because I needed to feel like I wasn't going crazy. My notebook filled with questions I was afraid to ask out loud. Julia found me in the hallway on a Thursday night. It was past 7, and the office was nearly empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow. She grabbed my arm gently, eyes wide with something that looked like fear. Her hands were shaking. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, glancing back toward Javier's office. My chest tightened. "What's wrong?" She took a shaky breath, and I could see her weighing whether to stay silent or speak up. "I heard him on the phone with Felix earlier. He said you're going to present garbage at the pitch and then he'll swoop in with the real deck and save the day. He's planning to take the bonus and the credit. He said you'd never even know what hit you." The words hit me like cold water. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My hands went numb. Then everything clicked into place. The old data, the missing meetings, the fake personas. He'd set me up to fail from the beginning. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood there, perfectly still, while my brain recalculated everything. Then I thanked Julia, my voice barely above a whisper, and walked back to my desk on legs that felt like rubber. That night, I stayed late. Everyone else had gone home, and the office was silent, except for the hum of computers and the distant buzz of the vending machine. I pulled up every file Javier had given me and started reading like a detective hunting for clues. I checked metadata, tracked edit histories, compared documents side by side. The timestamps told a story Javier never meant me to see. The streamlined brief he'd handed me? It was a gutted version of the real one. Key client pain points had been removed. Strategic priorities had been rewritten to sound generic and useless. I printed everything and spread it across my desk, circling inconsistencies in red pen. Then I opened my notebook and replayed every conversation with Javier in my head, looking for patterns. Each memory now carried new weight, new meaning. By the time I stood up to leave, the city outside was dark and quiet. My hands had stopped shaking. I knew exactly what I had to do. If Javier wanted to play games, I'd play them better. But he'd never see me coming until it was too late. I grabbed my coat and walked out, already planning my next move. I built two versions of myself. By day, I was the obedient project lead, following Javier's instructions to the letter. I smiled in meetings, nodded at his feedback, and sent him updates on the deck he thought I was building, the one full of dead-end data and useless fluff. I became an actress playing a role. By night, I became someone else. I rebuilt the entire project from scratch, using real information I hunted down myself. Julia helped me find the original client files buried in a shared drive. Javier thought I'd never access. I devoured every document, real customer data, actual market research, current financials, every number, every trend, every customer complaint. I named my secret project folder Helios, after the Greek god of the sun. A new beginning. A sunrise I'd earned. Every night, I'd toggle between two decks, Javier's fake one and my real one. Two versions of the truth, running on parallel tracks. He had no idea I was working twice as hard to outsmart him. My coffee consumption doubled. My sleep schedule vanished. But every sacrifice felt worth it, and that ignorance was going to cost him everything. I needed to test if Javier was really watching me. So I set a trap. I created 3 generic, harmless slides. Pretty colors, corporate buzzwords, empty promises. Nothing useful, but polished enough to look important. The kind of content that sounded good but said nothing. I labeled them Final Concepts V3 and saved them in a shared folder I knew Javier monitored. Then I waited, checking the access logs every few hours. 2 days later, my suspicion was confirmed. Javier sent a pre-read document to Felix, our department head, asking for early feedback on his approach to Straton Tech. I opened the attachment, and there they were, my 3 generic slides, barely changed, presented as his own original work. My heart pounded as I took screenshots of everything. The timestamps, the file paths, the email headers. I saved them all in a hidden folder on my personal drive, organized and dated. He'd stolen my bait exactly as I'd hoped. Now I had proof he was monitoring my work and planning to use it against me. I closed my laptop and allowed myself a small smile. Let him think he's winning. The truth would come soon enough, and I'd have the receipts to prove every single lie. I reached out to Priya in the analytics department. She'd always been quick to respond and genuinely helpful. I sent her a carefully worded email. Hey Priya, working on a hypothetical scenario for a tech client. Could you send over current sector trends, adoption rates, churn triggers, behavior patterns? Anything recent would be amazing. I kept my tone casual, friendly, not desperate. She replied within an hour with a goldmine of data. Real numbers, fresh research, detailed breakdowns of what actually drove decisions in Straton Tech's industry. Graphs, charts, and statistical models I could actually use. I wired everything into my secret deck, building a narrative that wasn't just about what Straton Tech sold, but why their customers hesitated to buy. The patterns were clear once I had the right information. Their clients weren't afraid of the product, they were afraid of the transition. The onboarding process, the data migration risks. That's what we needed to solve. I leaned back in my chair and stared at my screen, feeling something close to triumph. This was the deck I'd defend with everything I had. This was the truth Javier had tried to bury, and it was beautiful. The official brief Javier gave me focused entirely on product features, speeds, feeds, technical specs. But I dug deeper. I found Straton Tech's community forum and read hundreds of customer complaints and questions. I scoured their support tickets, which were publicly accessible for research. I spent entire evenings just reading, absorbing, understanding. The story was completely different from what Javier's brief suggested. Customers weren't asking for more features. They were terrified of switching systems. They worried about losing data during migration. They feared downtime. They wanted safety nets and guarantees. So I rebuilt our proposal around one thing: trust. I designed a staged rollout plan with built-in safeguards, migration support teams, a 45-day trial period where they could reverse everything if it didn't work. I wrote it like I was talking to a nervous friend, not lecturing a boardroom. Every sentence was tested for clarity and empathy. By the time I finished, the deck felt alive. It had a heartbeat. Numbers mattered, but people closed deals. And I just figured out how to speak to the people behind the purchase orders. Javier's deck was a product brochure. Mine was a conversation. Javier scheduled a practice run 3 weeks before the pitch. He wanted to see my progress, he said, make sure I was on track. His calendar invite called it a mentorship check-in, which made my stomach turn. I showed him the decoy, those same generic, empty slides I'd been feeding him all along. He loved them. Perfect, he said, leaning back in his chair with that satisfied smile. Executives love simplicity. You're finally getting it. I nodded, pretending to scribble notes in my notebook. Inside, I was screaming. When he asked me to send the final deck for his review, I didn't hesitate. I sent the decoy within minutes, making sure the file name looked official and final. Then I watched. He forwarded it to Felix less than 10 minutes later, with a note about getting early alignment. The speed of it stunned me. I sat at my desk, staring at the email notification, and whispered to my screen, "Take it. Please, take all of it." He had no idea the real deck, Helios, was locked safely on my laptop, growing stronger every day. Let him rehearse with the fake one. Let him get comfortable. The higher his confidence, the harder the fall would be. The night before the pitch, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table and went through Helios one final time, slide by slide, word by word. I added a cost calculator showing what inaction would cost Stretton Tech over the next year. I built a migration timeline with zero downtime, broken into phases clients could control. I included a 12-month adoption roadmap with proof points from similar companies who'd succeeded. Every detail was checked, double-checked, and verified. At 2:47 in the morning, I saved the final version to a USB drive and backed it up in 3 places. Then I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing answers to questions I hoped they'd ask. I didn't want revenge. Revenge was loud and messy and temporary. I wanted something better. I wanted the truth to be so undeniable, so clear, that no one could ignore it. I wanted Javier to lose because I'd won, not because I'd destroyed him. The sun crawled through my window around 6. I got up, showered, and put on my best blazer. My throat was dry. My heart was steady. Today was the day everything would finally come to light. There was still an open Q&A period with Stretton Tech's operations team. Most vendors ignored it. Too much work for minor details. But I saw an opportunity. I sent 3 precise questions about their current migration process, backup protocols, and rollback capabilities. Questions that showed I understood the technical complexity they were facing. Talia from their ops team responded within 30 minutes. Her email was short but telling. "We've never had a vendor ask about migration guardrails this early. Refreshing." I smiled at my screen. I wasn't just building a pitch deck. I was showing them I understood their real fears. That I'd done the homework no one else bothered with. Javier's approach was all flash and promises. Mine was built on questions and safeguards. When I printed Talia's responses and added them to my final deck, I felt that same quiet thrill I'd felt the night Julia warned me. This wasn't luck. This was preparation meeting opportunity. And I was more prepared than Javier could ever imagine. I slipped the printed pages into my folder and checked my watch. 6 hours until the pitch. 6 hours until everything changed forever. I added one final touch to the decoy slides, a tiny, nearly invisible watermark in the corner. Just the letter H. Not to destroy anyone, but to prove where the work came from if I needed to. Then I printed access logs from the shared drive, showing who'd opened which files and when. Everything was documented. Everything was traceable. I created a timeline of events, matching file access to email timestamps. I wasn't setting traps to hurt Javier. I was protecting the truth. I practiced my opening line one more time in the bathroom mirror. Good morning. Thank you for being here. Simple, calm, confident. My hands shook slightly as I gripped the edge of the sink. I took a slow breath, held it, then let it out. You've got this, I told myself. You've done the work. You've built something real. Now just show them. I straightened my blazer, grabbed my bag, and headed for the elevator. My phone buzzed with a text from Priya. You're going to crush it. I typed back a simple thumbs up emoji, even though my eyes stung with unexpected tears. Today, the truth would have a microphone, and I was going to make sure everyone heard it loud and clear. An hour before the meeting, Julia sent me a message. He just sent a pre-read to Felix. It's your decoy deck, dressed up with his name on it. I opened the attachment she forwarded. There it was, my fake slides, polished and reformatted, presented as Javier's original strategic vision. His name in the header where mine should have been. Felix had replied, looks solid but feels thin. Where's the depth? I closed my laptop and felt a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. I hated that I enjoyed watching Javier fumble, but I also knew he'd created this situation, not me. He'd made the choice to steal, to deceive, to sabotage. I pushed the guilt aside and focused on what mattered. The client. Straighten Tech didn't care about office politics. They needed a solution that worked. And I had one. I grabbed my laptop bag and headed to the conference room early. I wanted to set up, test the screen connection, make sure nothing could go wrong with the tech. When I walked in, the room smelled like fresh coffee and tension. I plugged in my laptop, opened Helios, and waited. Javier arrived 10 minutes later, smiling like he owned the world. He had no idea it was about to crumble beneath his feet. The Stratton Tech team filed in, CEO, COO, CTO, and Talia from Ops. They shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, settled into their chairs. Javier positioned himself at the head of the table, but I'd already claimed the presentation screen. He shot me a look, subtle, but I caught it. A flash of irritation quickly masked by false confidence. Then he leaned over and whispered, keep it simple, and let me land the plane when it matters. I nodded, my face perfectly neutral. Inside, my pulse roared. The COO glanced at his watch. Shall we begin? I stood up, clicked to my first slide, and said those words I'd practiced 100 times. Good morning. Thank you for being here. Then I added something Javier wasn't expecting. I know you've seen a lot of proposals, but today, I want to talk about what your customers won't say in surveys, and how we can solve the problems they're afraid to admit. The room went still. The CTO leaned forward slightly. Javier's smile tightened. I clicked to the next slide and kept going, knowing there was no turning back now. This was it. The moment everything changed, the moment truth finally got its turn to speak. I walked them through the real data. Current adoption trends, behavior patterns, actual customer fears pulled from their own forums and support tickets. I showed them the cost of inaction. How much revenue they'd lose if customers kept hesitating. Then I introduced the solution. A staged rollout with zero downtime, migration concierges assigned to each client, and a 45-day safety net where they could reverse everything if something went wrong. True control, real guarantees. I showed them a week-by-week plan with measurable checkpoints and fallback options. Each phase was designed to build confidence, not just deploy technology. The CTO stopped taking notes and just watched. The COO nodded slowly, making small marks on his notepad. Talia from Ops smiled, actually smiled, and whispered something to the CEO. When I finished, there was a beat of silence that felt like the room was holding its breath. Then the CEO said, "This is the first time a vendor has addressed our customers' real fears instead of just selling us features." My chest loosened for the first time in weeks. I glanced at Javier. His face had gone pale, and a thin line of sweat had formed along his hairline. He stood up quickly, clearing his throat, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Great start," he said, voice too bright, too forced. "Now let me add some strategic context to tie this all together." Javier launched into his version. The one built from my decoy slides. It was polished, professional, confident, but it was also empty. He talked about product features, competitive advantages, market positioning, all the things the official brief had told him to focus on. But nothing about migration fears, nothing about customer hesitation. Nothing about the 45-day safety net or the rollback plan. He clicked through slides quickly, like he was rushing to get somewhere. 10 minutes in, the COO glanced at the printed deck I'd left on the table, my real deck, then back at Javier's screen. 15 minutes in, the CTO interrupted. "Where's the rollout detail you mentioned in the pre-read?" Javier blinked. "I'm getting to that." But he wasn't, because it didn't exist in his version. He fumbled through a few more slides, then wrapped up with a generic closing about partnership and innovation. The room felt flat. The CEO folded his hands and said, "Thank you, we have some questions." Javier smiled. "Of course, fire away." But the first question wasn't for him, it was for me. The CEO looked directly at me. "Can you walk us through the migration timeline again? Specifically, the safeguards." I opened my laptop, pulled up the detailed breakdown, and walked them through it step by step. Javier tried to interject. "We had some internal alignment issues on this," but the COO cut him off with a raised hand. "Let her finish." I explained the phased approach, the dedicated support teams, the rollback triggers. Talia asked about data integrity during migration, and I had an answer ready, pulled from her own earlier questions. The CTO asked about downtime windows, and I showed him the zero downtime architecture we'd build. Every question I had a real answer, backed by research and documentation. Javier had talking points and empty promises. The difference was obvious to everyone in the room. Then the COO said something that made my stomach flip. "We received a pre-read last night from Javier, outside the normal process. It didn't include any of this detail. Why the discrepancy?" Javier's face flushed red, his jaw tightening visibly. "Just enthusiasm," he said quickly, his voice cracking slightly. "Wanted to get feedback early." The CEO's eyes narrowed slightly, his pen tapping against his notebook. "Without the project lead's input?" Silence filled the room like smoke. Javier opened his mouth, then closed it. I stayed perfectly still, letting the moment breathe, letting the truth settle over everyone like snow. I pulled up my screen and showed them both versions side by side, the decoy slides with the faint H watermark and the full Helios deck. "These were early scaffolds," I said calmly, meant to test messaging concepts. The final approach evolved significantly once we gathered real customer insights. I clicked between the two versions, showing how one was empty and the other was alive with detail. Talia leaned forward. "This," she said, tapping the Helios version on her printed copy, "is what our users have been asking for. I've never seen a vendor address it this clearly." The CEO nodded. Javier tried to recover. "Right, exactly. Team effort, lots of iteration." But the COO wasn't listening to him anymore. He was looking at me. "You built this," I nodded. "With help from your team. Korea in analytics provided the data. Talia answered critical questions about your operations. And Julia made sure I had access to the right files." Javier's jaw tightened. The CEO made a note on his pad, then looked up. "We'll need to discuss process integrity after this meeting." During the break, Javier sent a company-wide email from his phone. The subject line, "Clarification on project roles." I felt my watch buzz and glanced at the preview. He was spinning the story, claiming miscommunication, implying I'd gone rogue, framing himself as the steady hand trying to manage a new lead. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The CFO, Mr. Adler, walked back into the room mid-sentence, his face unreadable. "Javier," he said quietly, "step outside for a moment." Javier stood, forcing a smile. "Of course." Through the glass wall, I watched them talk. Javier gestured broadly, his voice rising even though I couldn't hear the words. Mr. Adler's expression never changed, flat, cold, final. After 5 minutes, Javier walked toward the elevators, shoulders tight. Mr. Adler returned alone. He took his seat and looked at the Straighten Tech team. "We've received a vendor grievance regarding an unauthorized referral fee arrangement that bypassed company policy," he said evenly. "It's unrelated to this project, but it's part of a larger review." A heavy silence settled over the room. I hadn't known about any referral issue, but it added weight to an already tilting scale. The Stratton Tech CEO stood up and extended his hand toward me. "We want your roadmap," he said, "and we want you leading implementation." The room erupted in polite applause, nothing loud or dramatic, just the kind of professional acknowledgement that means everything. The COO shook my hand next. "We'll finalize terms this week, but consider this a yes." Talia caught my eye and mouthed, "You earned this." I felt my throat tighten with emotion I'd been holding back for 3 months. Mr. Adler stood as well. "We'll handle internal matters separately," he said. "But I want to be clear. This win is yours." After they left, I sat alone in the conference room for a moment, staring at my laptop screen. Helios glowed softly, the deck that had saved me. My phone buzzed with a text from Julia. "You did it." I typed back slowly, fingers shaking. "We did it." Then I closed my laptop, grabbed my bag, and walked out into the hallway. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Javier's office was dark. The lights were off, and I didn't look back. By Friday, Javier's desk was cleared out. No dramatic exit, no big confrontation, just an empty office with bare walls and a recycling bin full of papers. Word spread quickly through the office. Some people seemed shocked. Others just nodded, like they'd seen it coming. Julia stopped by my desk that afternoon with a small smile. "He's gone," she said softly. I nodded. "I heard." She hesitated, then added, "You know he tried to blame you in his exit meeting, right? Said you went rogue, ignored his guidance." I felt a flicker of old anger, but it faded quickly. "Does it matter?" I said. "The work speaks for itself." She squeezed my shoulder. "It really does." That evening, my bank app pinged with a notification. The $75,000 bonus had been deposited. I stared at the number until it stopped feeling like a typo, then closed the app and set my phone down. The money was life-changing. But the real victory wasn't the bonus. It was knowing I'd trusted myself when everyone else told me to fall in line. I'd built something real in the shadows while Javier performed in the light. And in the end, truth won. On Monday, I sent Julia a bouquet of flowers with a simple note. "For hearing what wasn't meant to be heard and telling who needed to know. Thank you." She texted me a photo of them on her desk with 3 heart emojis. I also sent Priya a gift card and a message. "Your data saved this project. I couldn't have done it without you." She replied, "Anytime. That's what good teams do." The Stratton Tech implementation kicked off the following week. I led the first strategy session, and Talia's ops team was incredible, engaged, thoughtful, asking all the right questions. We built the rollout plan together, refining it in real time. It felt like the opposite of those 3 months with Javier. No games, no hidden agendas, just smart people solving real problems. The CEO pulled me aside after one meeting. "I've been in this industry 20 years, he said. "I can usually tell when someone's just trying to close a deal. But you actually cared about getting it right." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "That's the only way I know how to work." He smiled. "Don't change." A month later, I got promoted to senior project lead. Felix called me into his office and said, "You've earned this." The Stratton Tech win was impressive, but the way you handled it, staying professional, keeping your head down, doing the work, that's what separates good from great. I thanked him, still processing everything. It felt surreal. 3 months ago, I was being sabotaged, gaslit, set up to fail. Now I was leading one of the biggest accounts in company history. That night, I went to my favorite coffee shop and sat by the window, watching the city move past. I thought about Javier, where he was now, what he was doing, whether he'd learned anything. Part of me hoped he had. But mostly, I just felt relieved it was over. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old messages, finding the one from Julia the night she'd warned me. I heard him. "He's planning to use you." If she hadn't told me, I never would have built Helios. I never would have known to protect myself. I sent her one more message. "I owe you everything." She replied instantly. "You owe yourself. I just opened the door. You walked through it." 6 months later, Stratton Tech's rollout was ahead of schedule. Their customer adoption rate hit 83% in the first quarter, the highest in company history. The CEO sent a thank you email to our entire team, singling me out by name. I printed it and put it in a folder I kept at home, along with screenshots of the decoy slides, the access logs, and Julia's warning message. Not because I wanted to relive the pain, but because I never wanted to forget the lesson. Trust your instincts, document everything, and never assume someone has your best interests at heart just because they smile when they talk to you. I walked past the building's glass exterior one evening after a late meeting, and my reflection caught me off guard. I looked different, older maybe, but also steadier, more sure of myself. Javier had tried to bury me. Instead, he'd forced me to dig deeper than I ever thought I could. And in that digging, I'd found something he never had: the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing your work is real. He never knew I'd been building the real thing the whole time. Not until the room chose the truth. And by then, it was already too late.